Welcome to another edition of this series of talks organized on behalf of Spiders, the sole platform for initiating discourses on equitable and resilient society. These talks complement a series of papers published on the Spiders platform dedicated to outlining the building blocks of post-capitalist political economy, not oriented around growth and profit, but rather good lives and a flourishing web of life in times of profound planetary change. Hosting these talks are founder of Peer-to-Peer Foundation, Michelle Bowens, and myself, Rok Krantz. Today, to help us outline some of these building blocks, we are joined by two distinguished guests, co-authors of the paper on alternative national accounting, Jacques Richard and Sebastian Berger. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
So instead of us doing the introductions on your behalf, we thought it would be great for our audiences to hear from yourselves how you would describe your backgrounds and research. And in no particular order, why don't we start with you, Sebastian?
Thanks. So I'm Sebastian Berger. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of the West of England in Bristol. And my expertise is in, you could say, the economics of Carl William Kapp, or the so-called social costs of neoliberalism, which is a topic that I've been working on for about 15 to 20 years, trying to understand the problems that arise in capitalism or neoliberalism from the cost shifting that occurs within capitalist firms, and from a historian of economic thought perspective, to first of all trying to understand the problems in conceptualizing or even thinking about that. And so from a philosophical or historical orientation, you could also say hermeneutic orientation, I've tried to wrap my head around this, less from an accounting perspective. This is where Professor Richard and I actually try to work together to link in these different approaches from, let's say, my more economic hermeneutic approach and his more critical accounting approach. And we will see that in a minute. And so, yeah, in a nutshell, that's been my work for the past. And that's also what my article is about.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Jacques, would you like to say a little bit about your work?
Yes, thank you. So I begin to be interested in the topic of ecological economics about 15 years ago, because we founded in my University Paris-Dauphine a special master devoted to this question. And at that time, I realized that accounting could be a good weapon in matter of ecological problem, because it is a powerful tool today to defend, to conserve unfortunately only the financial capital. And my idea was to take this weapon against, to return the weapon against capitalism, and to use this very, very powerful weapon of conservation for the sake of natural and human capital. It was the beginning of a kind of very interesting experience. After this lapse of 15 years, we have published with some former students who have made dissertations with me in different countries, notably in China, in Russia. So we have developed a kind of proposal. The name is KRTDL model, which is today, even in France, also has promoted some interest in different spheres. So I am in full swing of developing this idea with fortunately the help of economists such as Sebastian. And there is a growing interest, but the struggle is very difficult because the power which is at the top of the financial sphere is very, very strong.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. And I think that's a perfect kind of interlude into your article with Sebastian. So if we understood correctly, Sebastian, you will take over and explain a little bit about the basic tenets of this specific article.
Yeah, that's right.
The floor is yours.
All right, so this article was about bringing together the perspectives of critical accounting and what might be called critical heterodox economics in the tradition of institutional, ecological, but also social economists, and in particular, a body of work done by economists such as Thorstein Veblen, Carl William Kapp, John Maurice Clark, and others, since understanding the problem on understanding the problem arising from firms' capital accounting and cost accounting practices, in particular the problem of cost shifting and social costs. And our topic deals with the question of transitioning national accounting from monetary to social ecological cost accounting. However, this question cannot be addressed without addressing the limitations of existing firms' accounting practices, because it is here that the problems emerge regarding the monetary calculations of costs and capital. So these problems then also affect national accounting. And that's why we have to start by talking about what's wrong with firms accounting and monetary accounting in general before we can really address national accounting. So first we highlight the fact that critiques of monetary national accounting have a long-standing history, but have not led to substantial reforms. And we thus do not have so much a knowledge problem, but a problem of implementation, or what you might call institutional reform. However, saying it's not a knowledge problem, it's not trying to underestimate the deeper theoretical quest for understanding the nature of the problem. So we argue that the problem really lies in the flaws of economic calculations based on market prices or monetary exchange values. And then that's on the firm level and the national level. But what does that mean? And what do we know about that? And so we actually turn to the insights that were generated and presented and discussed during the so-called socialist calculation debate, which is also sometimes referred to as the planning debate of the 1920s and 1930s, that emerged as a result of Ludwig von Mises' challenge to Otto von Neurath's proposal for calculations in real kind in a socialist or communist economy. So within this debate, those who defended the planned economy and an alternative to market-based calculation developed a host of arguments. What are the problems with monetary calculations? And they revolve around mainly ontological and epistemological limitations of monetary calculations. And so what we have distilled from this debate is mainly the insights of Carl William Kapp, but also Karl Polanyi on what are these limitations. And first of all, we like to mention the inability of monetary market price-based calculations to capture complex environmental effects. And we call this an informational limitation. So an individual firm that operates based on market prices in terms of its accounting cannot harness the full information, does not possess the full information, and cannot know about all the effects triggered in complex environmental and social systems that are knock-on effects from their decisions. So we call that an informational limitation of the market calculus. And that actually contradicts the claims of Mises fundamentally, because Mises and his collaborator Hayek argued that markets are superior in terms of their informational capacities, relative to a state or governmental body. And based on our understanding, that's actually not true, and might actually, it's actually the opposite, because whereas firms cannot know, an individual firm cannot know many of these effects, a state agency that is designed to understand these complex effects might well be able to establish a body of knowledge about these complex environmental effects that a firm's production decision entails. So that's the first, and we would say probably the most important argument is on epistemological limitations of the market calculus. The second important point is the inability to reflect absolute values, because the market calculus is about relative values and exchange values, and absolute values such as human life and health, but also the life and health of other species, cannot be reflected through exchange values, because absolute values cannot be exchanged against equivalent, so they don't have exchange value, they have dignity. And that's a position developed by Immanuel Kant, and we would call this the problem of value incommensurability, that you cannot express an absolute value through an exchange value. So you cannot capture it. So it's another limitation. The third limitation would be the inability to express the irreversibility of economic process, meaning the entropic nature of the biophysical transformation process. And we call that the entropy incompatibility of the market calculus. It's not designed to express the problem or capture the problem of entropy. And irreversibilities cannot be addressed through a mechanism that is perfectly reversible, such as a market transaction, where you exchange goods and money, and that there's no loss of entropy. So then the fourth limit, inability, would be to reflect the needs of those without purchasing power, those who cannot participate in market transactions. So their needs are not reflected in that. So it's an incompletion, just like future generations are not reflected. So the market calculus is incomplete because the needs of a great number of people living in the future, and even though the poor of today, are not reflected. So it's incomplete, meaning the information in the market calculus that is reflected in it is not complete. And we have the same problem with the issue of cost shifting, and we'll talk about that more today, that if a significant part of the costs are shifted away outside of the market, out of the balance sheet of capitalist firms, then those costs do not feature within the price system. So prices do not reflect full cost information, so they're systemically too low, and so they, again, incomplete. The market calculus is an incomplete system of information. And then just in addition, we really have this issue that market prices have a lot to do with asymmetric power relations in markets. And so they're much more the result of really an outcome of an arbitrariness, because depending on who has the power, which industry, based on which technologies is at the moment at the helm, we get a completely different set of price relationships. And so there's nothing natural about a price system, and it's quite an arbitrary system and not a scientifically established system that would reflect scientific knowledge about the preconditions of survival of society in the long run in terms of sustainability. So we have these limitations, but there are many more. I just now mentioned these because they help us to understand where we're going with this work. And so after having established what already we understand the problem to be, meaning the market calculus, we are even more surprised that the mainstream economists have really misconceptualized the problem in a way that would demand it to be fixed through the market mechanism. So the market mechanism being the cause of the problem, they prescribe more of the cause to the problem. So they say, well, we'll fix it through another market mechanism. Really, we understand, and they call it an externality or market failure. And they say, well, we just have to fix the market to improving the market or more market. And what we argue is they fail to understand the depth of the problem, which is residing in the market calculus itself. So as a result of to portray this fundamental problem of cost shifting and these epistemological, ontological limitations as fixable through isolated individual ex post measures. And the problem is portrayed as almost accidental, happening in a minority of cases. And so the main mechanisms proposed are taxation, or compensation payments, or introducing some trading or market mechanism to fix it. And this is complete mischaracterization or misconception of the problem. So social costs or externalities from our perspective, meaning this part of the share of the costs or the effects costs that are not accounted for, that's not a thing that can be exchanged or brought back through some kind of mechanism, but it's really a loss or damage that is sustained by society, future generations, or third parties that is even hidden for some time. So there's secrecy around it. Oftentimes we don't know the true extent of these losses and damages until it's too late. And it can't be easily reversed because some of the losses are irreversible, such as human life and health. So, and it's clearly not an accidental problem because it's rooted in institutions that we created, namely accounting practices and other legal institutions. So what we really see here is social costs as being a problem of a system-wide issue, institutional issue in the production system steered by market calculus. And so the root of the problem, the cause, is in organizing production through market valuation. And that then leads to all these other knock-on effects. So we don't think it's appropriate to solve it through more market mechanisms, but we need other mechanisms, institutional reforms. So this requires a systemic, meaning institutional system-wide approach that is precautionary and preventative, based on scientific insights into the preconditions for social and ecological sustainability. And what we propose is changes in accounting standards, changes in social ecological safety standards. These are legal and by law, and as well as technological controls, which are implied really in those standard setting processes. And again, what we see here that the mainstream does not talk about technology. It does not talk about future as a modality of time, and leaving technology and future out is, and therefore leaving time out of this discussion is a major problem. It's not surprising because they also leave entropy out of it. So if you leave entropy out of it, you leave time out of it, and then you're really lost because you have misconceptualized the problem, and so the solutions can't work. So what we have to be honest about is that even these reforms that we're proposing, which have to do with conservation, conserving the lasting sources of wealth, meaning, you know, the funds and stocks of production, human beings, nature, ecology, some part of the biophysical costs cannot shift, cost shifting towards the future cannot be avoided, and that has to do with the entropy law. But most parts can certainly be avoided. Most parts of this socialization of cost and cost shifting that can be avoided through adequate institutional reform. So the minimum task that we outline in our article is to reform capitalist accounting practices to reflect the full real costs of production. What does that mean? So we need an understanding of what are the true costs of sustainable social provisioning. And that means we need to know the costs of maintaining funds and stocks of production in real terms, not in monetary terms. We need to know how much does it take to maintain these funds and stocks of production? That includes machines, that includes humans, that includes ecological funds of production. And what does the upkeep cost, the maintenance cost, the so-called user cost? Because only if we know the user costs, we can conserve, we can actually pay for the costs of conservation. And so we need a real account of that in terms of matter energy, flows, and services. And then we can build on the standard setting. But that requires a knowledge of complex systems. So we need to work with a host of sciences, ecology, environmental toxicology, environmental sciences, to try to set the standards correctly, to stay within those, within an area where conservation can occur. So that has to do with defining user rates and technologies adequate to not over-harvest stocks, to not over-harvest funds, and to keep them within the boundaries. And so it has a lot to do with agreeing on legal standards. And this is a social process, and that is socially costly. So it costs something to do that. There's a cost, there's a transaction cost, there is a cost of maintaining funds and stocks. And the goal here is to say these costs have to be borne as much as possible by producers. So producers, so we need to start at the source of the problem. Producers need to be stopped from cost shifting, and they need to pay these costs of production. And that's where the capitalist accounting reform comes in, because we need to define the human fund of production and ecosystem funds of production as a capital, so that the conservation rules don't just apply to financial capital, but also to human capital and also to ecological capital, because then cost shifting within balance sheet operations can no longer occur. And if you stop cost shifting at the production side, at the side of the source of the problem, that's preventative. That's a precautionary approach, and a preventative approach, rather than what the mainstream of economists propose, to let the problem happen and then fix it later if we find out about it through some compensation market or taxation mechanism, which is not preventative. But what we need is actually preventative approach. And we believe that that has to do with legal accounting standards and practices that we need to address. And that's, of course, where all the work that has been done by Professor Richard comes in on this matter. And so maybe I would hand over to him at this point if he wants to chip in on how that would specifically work in his framework.
I have a speak. There is a problem. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. So Sebastian asked you to present how you solve some of these issues with your three capital accounting.
Yes.
Maybe Sebastian, you want to reformulate your question to Jacques?
Yeah, no problem. I just wanted to ask if Jacques wants to fill in some idea or information about how specifically a reformed capitalist accounting tool, bookkeeping operation could look that prevents the cost shifting from producers to humans and society and future generations. How that would work within existing double entry bookkeeping. So it's basically an evolutionary approach, not a revolutionary. It's not trying to eliminate markets. It's not trying to eliminate private property. It's not trying to eliminate money. It is basically a reform proposal at this micro level that would allow us to get the price system. First of all, a full real cost price system, and how that would work with the double entry bookkeeping.
Okay. Do you want me to speak? Okay. Okay. Also, starting point is that a few people know that there is a kind of worldwide constitution based on accounting. Economics are turning around this basic constitution. This constitution is named IFRS. It's shared by almost all states of the world. A very powerful weapon for capitalists. And second main point is that in classical accounting, there is no question to value the asset on price basis. It means that classical accounting is devoted to conservation. There is no idea of calculation of potential profit. All assets, except those that have been sold, are on a cost value. And in the liability side, there is the capital. Marx has seen the capital on the asset side. He has not seen that the capital is something which is due to the capitalist to be conserved. So a very powerful instrument on conservation. And it is perfectly possible to turn this instrument in favor of the symmetric conservation of the human and the natural capital. Of course, connected to scientific scientific targets of conservation of nature, for example, those promoted by the international groupement of scientists, and for human capital, some targets of conservation given by ergonomes and so on. So if we take this idea of capital as debt, it means something to be reimbursed. It is a powerful instrument in order to transform the whole economic system with new prices, new cost, new prices, and also the idea, very important, of future ecological co-management. You know the famous German co-management, but it is an instrument which is not sufficient in order to take account of nature and to take account of the power of financial people. So the idea of care is to transform this management in order to reintegrate the power of representants who could give their approbation of the conservation of the different types of capitals. So it is a revolution in a sense of power. Capital is power, as said by some specialists, but this power has all been in the hands of the financial capitals, and it is very important today to have an equivalent of the today's system of accounting, but return in favor of the conservation of the free capitals. Economists say generally that there are three types of factors, but these three types of factors have never been taken in serious for the sake of their systematic conservation. So this is the idea, the broad idea. This is connected to a new system of laws, of course. Accounting is a branch of law. Some international teachers in accounting, in law, have not seen that the power of accounting law. You are obliged today to conserve your financial capital. In France and in other countries, there is a kind of delict for non-conservation of capital, but the equivalent is not is not aware, is not present for the sake of the two other capitals. These are the broad ideas, of course, and this is difficult for accountants, especially ecological accountants, to have their word understood, because people, due to the neoclassics notably, they always believe that every monetization is for the sake of a price estimation of assets. And but you could conceive a monetization which is connected to the conservation of the free capitals. But it's not simple to say that. Many people who do not have the acquaintance with the classical accounting believe that every monetization is for marchandization. So it is difficult to introduce this new idea of a new system of accounting. And of course, to finish, national accounting is based fundamentally on micro accounting. And if you transform micro accounting, which is a priority, you transform also GDP, you transform macroeconomics data. Excuse me, my English is not very good, but I try to do my best.
Thank you. No, it was understandable. I think our listeners will definitely get the explanation that you gave. Rock, is it time for us to ask some questions?
Sure. If Sebastian, did you think that we would close this with Jacques kind of filling?
Yeah,
in?
sounds good. Sounds good.
Sure.
Okay, so maybe I can start, Rock, if you don't mind. Is that okay? Sure. Yeah. So I went through the text, which I found very interesting, and I just took out some of the concepts that I think not everybody is familiar with. So, you know, some things that you might want to explain to a broader audience. So the first question is that in the beginning of your text, you says that accounting, classic accounting, follows a formal rationality, but not a substantive rationality. So if you care to explain the difference between these two forms of rationality and how it applies to this issue.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. So basically, this distinction between these two forms of rationality goes back to Max Weber, and Carl William Kapp has a particular interpretation of this distinction. But let's say, why is it called rationality? Why is it called formal rationality? The idea is that capitalist accounting practices represent a form of rationality, but why is it formal? And so Weber and Kapp agree that it is formal because it is not rooted in anything outside of itself. So it seems rational to account for capital, financial capital in a particular way. But if you take the position of Max Weber and Kapp, and you say also Karl Polanyi, is that really this is not acknowledging the fact that what you take as an input for this operation is based, for example, on things like manipulation. Let's say you use advertisement to manipulate your consumers, and they buy it at a higher price than they would naturally, or they would not have bought it at all. So you have created something artificially, which you then also use for your inputs into your double entry bookkeeping, which is it's a rational operation, but it's formal. It's not acknowledging the fact that the information you're using is a result of a social process that is largely a result of power asymmetries and arbitrary results, such as excluding the poor or future generations. So it seems very rational. But Kapp really pointed out, or bringing out this element that Weber already mentioned but didn't fully bring out. It's formal. It's like a computer would. A computer would not care what information it's using, but a human being say, "Oh, I'm here calculating all day with numbers which are largely arbitrarily derived. For example, because they don't include a large part of the cost that we've externalized and shifted to future generations. So all the numbers I'm using, I'm calculating all day are really not only arbitrary, they're also incomplete. And therefore, I think to myself, I'm being rational and making rational decisions, allocation decisions based on profitability concerns. But that is really a very a dumb or narrow version of rationality, and therefore formal, purely formal, because it doesn't have any concern for the fact that the information you are using for your so-called rational calculation is incomplete, arbitrary, exclusionary, and so on. So that's the idea why that's only formal. And Max Weber and Kapp construed an alternative version of a rationality that is substantive, that actually cares about whether an economic cause of action or a calculation or decision making, economic decision making, supplies for the needs of a community. So in short, social provisioning process. And that then involves a substantive concern for, okay, what are the total real costs of this decision? You know, are we simply shifting lots and lots of costs to the future? Well, that's not good. Maybe we should, you know, make an economic decision that does not shift so many costs to the future. So there's a concern for the longevity and sustainability of community in this provisioning process, and hence it's substantive. Why substance? Substance actually in the German word is material, materiale Rationalität. So there's a concern for the material nature of this process, and that goes back to Aristotle, that there is a material, or you could say substance that is in itself actualizing its own potential, and that's human being living in society. It's a living entity that is has potential from nature and that is unfolding in this material reality, and we are concerned with that this is not about an empty calculation of costs and benefits, that is money things that have no life. You know, for Aristotle, money is pure nomisma. It is a designated thing in exchange. It is in itself void of life. It's not of substance. And so this is completely different, the rationality that is concerned for substance. And of course, this Aristotelian tradition links up with the Kantian concern, and that is why Weber's definition is called neo-Kantian, a neo-Kantian concern for a rationality that is concerned for what is good for human being and society or humanity as a whole. And that's the categorical imperative. And so you need an economic rationality that has the categorical imperative of Kant written into it, which is a concern for the whole of humanity. And that's really completely different from formal rationality.
Thank you. Thank you. If I may maybe ask one more question, and I'll let Rock take over.
Yep.
So I understand that Jacques' idea and yours is to replace, you know, purely financial accounting with a tri-capital kind of accounting, where you have, you still have productive capital, but you also have humans and nature as capitals that has to be conserved. And I hear from Jacques that he says that nature can be monetized, but not for market pricing, but for conservation. I think that's what I understood, right? But I also see in your text that you talk about representation, and in Jacques' contribution just now, he talks about the German model of co-management. So here's my question: how do you represent nature? Like who can talk for the bees and for the, you know, and for the earthworms and all these beings that we need in our agriculture and our industry? Are you going to put humans in charge of talking for nature, or what are your ideas about this kind of representation that you're talking about?
Okay, thank you very much question. As a matter of fact, if you take the example of nature, uh, there are two elements. First, there are some people in charge of defining the state of conservation of nature. It means, for example, specialists of ecology who are saying this ground, this earth is not is used in a way which is not compatible with the conservation of the nutriments. So there are an army of specialists of ecology, at least in big firms, which who have the speech to say if the conservation of nature is not good or is sufficient. These are problems of scientific problem of conservation, with the help also of some people who know well the situation, for example, fishers for fishes and so on. And there are the problem of distribution of profit and the control of the conservation of and the level of the budget. For you know that in care, capital is not an asset, it is a debt. It means a kind of budget for conservation. So here, this is another problem. It's no longer a problem of scientific determination of a constraint. It's a problem of respect of the calculation of cost and no distribution of a fictitious profit. So here you have representatives of the free capital and notably nature, other people from the preceding problem. And these representatives for nature, of course, nature cannot speak. And we are obliged to take account of people who could speak for this problem instead of nature. What kind of people? For example, people who live near in the forest, who are these tribes, for example, today in Amazon, they should have, within the care model, they should have a representation in the firms where the firms are working in these countries. This is one example, a systematic representation of these people. And of course, you can imagine that you have also inside these firms some workforce who are very interested in ecological problem, who could have also a speech. And of course, you can imagine that there are some ONG, what is it, ONG in French, you know, and representative of ONG and so on. So this is a debate about the representation. This representation must be a systematic one, and after it is a matter of control of the good types of representation in line with the specific data or situation in different countries. This is broadly the case.
Thank you. Thank you. Rock, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just may add my 2 cents here. Also, I think it might be relevant to highlight a fellow Frenchman, Bruno Latour's notion of a parliament of things here in terms of, well, we could say, yeah, there's, when we talk about ecology specialists and experts, there's also a lot of, yeah, epistemological, etc. problems there in terms of, you know, positivist orientations, etc., etc. And here, well, yeah, and just highlighting that, yeah, learning how to listen to nature and then speak on behalf of within the whole web of life that is present at, you know, kind of nested scales is quite the challenge, and kind of augmenting kind of the current economic system of that kind of outlook seems quite the challenge, which might lead me up.
I have a provocation maybe. So there is a new movement which is called the sovereign nature movement, and so these are people who believe that we have the technology today to create what they call DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations. So one of their ideas is to give a legal representation to a forest through a DAO, which is a kind of NGO that would have sensors, that would have all kinds of, observation capacity, and that would have the legal power to hire lawyers that would act on its behalf. It's just a provocation. Do you think this is a realistic thing, or you think this is something that you think is more fantastical at this point? I think it's an interesting way of thinking because it combines the newest technology with actually the traditions of the indigenous people who gave agency to natural forces. So I think it's an interesting way of thinking.
I am aware of this numerous proposal of lawyers, notably. I am perfectly aware, and I think it's an interesting idea, and it could be combined with KRTDL, but the idea of KRTDL is based on today's law on accounting. If you consider today's law of, in matter of accounting, the people in charge of the business have an obligation to conserve the financial capital. There is no obligation to personalize this capital. You understand? But lawyers are obliged, this is their specific way of thought. They believe that you need to have a personification of nature in order that it could be a good law. But accounting is a good proof that it's not obligatory. You could have an obligation to respect financial capital without any personification of capital. And this is the case in big companies. There is, so the global financial capital must be conserved, and it is obligatory. But why not a combination? I am not against. These people are fighting for the same cause. So I would say that unfortunately, accounting is not known by these people, except for some specific lawyers. I am working in France with some lawyers about this topic, notably the problem of the distribution of fictitious profit. It is a crime in France. You have not a crime, but delict, and you could go to jail. So if capitalists don't conserve their capital, they could have big problems. 5 years of jail, so the instruments in law are very, very diverse and very impressive in matter of financial capital. You have just to apply the best one, but there is no contradiction with these lawyers. Okay.
I have a fundamental issue I would like to discuss. So there was a study some years ago about the CAC 40 in France, the 4 biggest companies on the French stock market. And it came to the conclusion that if these companies had to apply true costs, none of them would be profitable. So isn't that a bit contradictory, where you want to introduce a system that is compatible with the market and that doesn't want to change the market, but actually, if it would be applied, it would be fundamentally in contradiction with the current system. So what does that tell you about your strategy? I'm not sure. Is that like a hack, or is it reformist, or is it revolutionary? So what is the strategy that is behind that kind of a bit of a paradox, I think?
I understand that. But my answer is maybe a simplistic one. If you change the cost, you change the price. And the big problem is that today the price are not correct ones. I think that Sebastian could agree with me. These are totally incompatible prices with conservation. So you have to change the whole of the system. And after, a very important thing is that in matter of profit, because in care TDL, there is a profit. Well, if a firm could have a lower cost, but true cost, why not? They are very clever, so they give a profit. But there is no case in care that you could oblige a firm to distribute profit on the basis of a predetermined rate of profit. This is the big problem today. So these people are able to ask for 15% of this profitability, and this is not compatible with the conservation of nature and not compatible with any conservation of capital. So this is a big problem.
Maybe I'd like to add something. It also depends on our theory of profits, which relates to the theory of price. Profit in the institutional or post-Keynesian literature is largely the result of the ability of firms to mark up costs of production. So you have your average costs of production across a range of outputs, and you mark them up based on your ability to mark up, which is your power situation within a given industry and market, and based on what the past price, the history of that market, the history of that industry. So markup pricing, and there's about 100 case studies that were conducted by Frederick Lee, one of the leaders in the heterodox economics movement, and that shows the reality in many industries of markup pricing. So profit is not something that necessarily goes away if you have full real cost pricing. If the profit is a markup, that would just change the nature of the markup. It would just shift it higher. It doesn't mean that the profit will disappear. So this will continue to be not a natural relationship, but a social. Profit is a social construct, and it depends on these power relations between consumers and producers in a given market. So I don't think that full real cost pricing will automatically eliminate profit.
Rock, your turn.
Yeah, thank you. So I might follow up on that. Essentially, we're kind of in the territory of what is kind of the theory of change here, right? In some sense, and we spoke about like reformist versus kind of revolutionary, and well, if we can kind of summarize, like at one level, it's about bringing back the externalities, right? Both in terms of towards nature, but also like time. Like one thing in this regard would be maybe interesting, just your 2 cents on the not Nobel Prize in economics in 2018, Willem Nordhaus, if you are familiar with his work. But it was quite a controversial kind of award in that, he was awarded for kind of integrating climate change into long-term macroeconomic models. But essentially, like his bottom line argument was that we should kind of allow for 3-degree warming of the planet. Are you familiar with that work and arguments?
A little bit, broadly familiar.
Yeah. Well, I'm not myself. I just thought it might be interesting to bring up. But...
Yeah, I remember that Steve Keen called Nordhaus a criminal. So he wasn't happy at all with that kind of work, which he said, underestimated the cost by making some arbitrary axiomatic judgments. But that might then bring to the last question we had, which was about, so when you talk about future generations and you say that we need to register the needs of future generations. So how do you do that? What's the mechanism that can account for that?
Well, I tend to agree with the position that was developed on this by Carl William Kapp, that this is largely a society's ethical obligation. It's a normative process in which this has to be decided because there are many intangibles, such as the future generations' needs that we don't know, future generations' technological capabilities or incapabilities. And as a result, Kapp proposed a precautionary and preventative approach ethics. So an ethics that is designed to reduce or prevent human suffering. And from this preventative approach of preventing human harm to humans, you get to this precautionary approach. And precaution means that if you don't know, you need to make sure that you err on the right side. And that, of course, then also contradicts to the work of people like Nordhaus, that you cannot establish some sort of scientific model that says, okay, 3 degrees warming is okay, or 3% growth per year is still okay. So we simply don't know these things. So it's best to err on the right side. And this is why Kapp proposed first and foremost to get the cost, understanding of the cost right. So this is a scientific quest, an accounting quest. It's interdisciplinary, because if we don't even get that right, we have no chance of determining what is preventative and precautionary. So the knowledge base is clearly important. And then we have to have a societal normative, and we see this now with COVID-19, these decisions revolving around human life and health are political, they are normative, they are societal, and there's no escape from that. But what we can deliver as scientists is the information and the knowledge that would enable society or the political process to make a well-informed normative decision on this matter. And again, from my orientation, I can say these key words of preventative and precautionary, because they do not really resound in the mainstream literature. The mainstream literature does not think in these terms. But people like Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen was clearly arguing for precautionary approach, and Carl William Kapp and Kenneth Boulding. So these are the people from within, you could say, economics, usually associated with heterodox economics, who would take such an approach, which is fundamentally different from the mainstream. Yeah.
Thank you. Rock, I don't know what you think, but I think we kind of rounded the discussion, and it's about an hour.
Yeah, well, maybe just one last bit. Like, I think we mentioned a few times now that at when it comes down to it, this is kind of a political challenge, almost first and foremost, in terms of kind of introducing these new costs, institutionalizing these new forms of decision making that could kind of bring that in. And I was just wondering if you had either in your work or in your kind of personal reflections, where would be kind of the main leverages or like loci of or where should we exert our strategies in actually institutionalizing or implementing these things Is it, you know, through academia, appealing to policymakers? Is it, you know, activism? Is it all of the above, or something else? Where do you see kind of the key area of struggle that we should be focusing on?
Well, I tend to agree with Jacques' work. And that's why I like Jacques' work very much, that it has to do with the legal structure of capitalism. And so accounting law is clearly, we cannot you know, win the political challenge if the accounting law continues to be wrong. Because then we would have maybe a good political process with countervailing power, with NGOs and academics and politicians that get this right. But accounting law will continue to make formally correct, but otherwise quite irrational decisions. So it needs to be one at that level, but that's Professor Richard's work as well, saying that the struggle for the legal work, you know, is political itself. And I found these insights that his work created on the undemocratic secrecy that prevails in defining accounting standards, I find that shocking. You know, how accounting standards are defined in secrecy, in undemocratic ways. So this, to me, I personally think that, you know, you need to start. This is where the battle needs to be fought from the root, because that's the root of the problem. If you don't fix that, all the other stuff will always just deal with the knock-on effects. You need really at the source to cut out the problem at the source. It's like a toothache. You know, you're not gonna, by brushing more, your cavity is not gonna go away. The cavity is there and it's festering. You need to have the cavity in your tooth fixed. So it's like Keynes said, economists are dentists. So if economists are dentists, we need to really have a root canal. And without the root canal, it's not going to work.
Okay, thank you so much. I think, yeah, Michel, did you have anything?
No, maybe Jacques, do you want to conclude? Maybe if you have any extra conclusion that you want to transmit to our listeners?
I would only just say a few words about, in France, there is a movement of économie sociale et solidaire, social and solidarity economy, and also the movement of commons in line with Ostrom. And these people are very much interested in the care model. So we develop experiences today, concrete experiences of the care model, but there are also experiences in big firms, because firms are in competition between themselves, even big, to prove that they are ecological ones. So there is a growing experiences. I am not aware totally, because I am not able to follow everything. And the idea is to promote some books of experiences to prove that it is possible to act, and also to propose to some governments to have a parallel ecological accounting, parallel to the IFRS of the wild, because we can dream that there is a revolution, but the first step is promoting these experiences with the help of people like you, and to discuss about some progress and some corrections, and to propose books of experiences, and also to try to introduce legislative proposals in some advanced states. And after, you could hope that there is something to change. But it's not simple, but possible in my view.
Yes, I just want to add, Rock, that so in France there is Coop des Communs, which is a collaboration between Commons and ESS people, and they've been working with Jacques on various concrete experiments with real existing entities. So this is a great opportunity to look at how does it work out in practice. So I think that's a very good direction that your work has taken there.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think it's crucial that we end on this, point of where there are already, active struggles and the actual subjects of that are spearheading this reform, and to see where perhaps some listeners could join in and help create this change, make it possible. So with that, I suppose we will conclude this session. We will also be happy to collate all of the kind of references you've provided, both in terms of books, movements, and so forth, and it will be all available on the Spiders platform. Thank you so much again, Sebastian and Jacques, for joining us today.
Thank you, Rock. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very interesting work. It's really it was an honor to be able to learn from you guys. There's a lot to read and a lot to learn still.
Thank you very much.
Very
Thank
much
you.
so.
Thank you. Bye. Yeah.
Until next time.